3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
I believe we should go to the moon. It will not be one man going to the moon. If we make this judgment affirmatively, it will be an entire nation.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
Beautiful view. Isn't that something? Magnificent.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
I believe we should go to the moon. It will not be one man going to the moon. We make this judgment affirmatively. It will be an entire nation.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Three, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
I believe we should go to the moon. It will not be one man going to the moon. We make this judgment affirmatively. It will be an entire nation.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
Beautiful view. Isn't that something? Magnificent sight out here. Magnificent desolation.
Because of what you have done, the heavens have become a part of man's world. For one priceless moment in the whole history of man, all the people on this earth are truly one.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Impossible, crazy, a waste of time and money. Those are some of the words that critics use to describe the idea of putting a man on the moon.
50 years ago, 3 men set out to explore a new frontier, and no one knew whether they would make it back. But the story begins long before Neil Armstrong took one small step, and a lot of it takes place right here in our own backyard.
Over the next hour, you'll hear from people right here in our community, how they had a hand in the lunar landing.
And we'll introduce you to those working on new projects to get us back to the moon and beyond. The goal was simple: land 2 men on the moon and bring them back alive.
For every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives.
But getting them there, a daunting task.
Delta take 0, burn time 557.
Every decision, every measurement.
Minus 0.1, VGY, minus 0.1, VGZ plus 0.1.
Calculated ever so carefully.
But if it were not for those on the ground, the Apollo 11 crew would not have made it back to Earth.
All this is possible only through the blood, sweat, and tears of a number of people. All you see is the 3 of us, but beneath the surface are thousands and thousands of others.
Many of whom were right here in Ohio.
If you drill down far enough, you can find all kinds of Ohio natives, Ohio expertise, Ohio experience.
The road to space goes through Ohio.
Local scientists, astronauts, and innovators, all a part of the ongoing story, one that's changing the course of history.
All the people on this earth are truly one in their pride in what you have done.
It is incredible to think that a small town boy from Northwest Ohio planted an American flag on the moon.
The people of Wapakoneta are very proud of their hometown hero, visiting the Armstrong Air and Space Museum since it opened in 1972. When we come back, an inside look at the home that shaped Neil Armstrong's legacy.
The entire Apollo program cost $25.4 billion. Based on inflation, that would be equivalent to $150 billion today.
The United States had not always planned on putting a man on the moon. In fact, we were not the first to send someone into outer space. In 1957, the Soviet Union changed the course of history. Take a look. This is a replica of Sputnik, the first man-made satellite. Compared to satellites today, it might not look like much, but it caught the world's attention and put the United States on edge. If it weren't for World War II, we may have never ventured into the world of rocket science. During the war, the Germans introduced ballistic missiles, laying the groundwork for rockets and space flight. Once the war ended, the great space race was on. A heated competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. With the launch of Sputnik in 1957, the Soviet Union took an early lead. Sputnik was the first satellite in space. And even though it only stayed in orbit for about 3 weeks, it was a major blow to the U.S. And in 1961, another major moment for the Soviets. Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space. But by that time, the U.S. had a new leader, one who was eager to explore the unknown.
No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space.
Newly elected President John F. Kennedy said there would be no more firsts for the Soviet Union. On May 25, 1961, he shocked the world by promising to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade.
We do not intend to stay behind, and in this decade, we shall make up and move ahead.
While the space race was heating up, a teenager from Wapakoneta, Ohio, was just starting to explore his love of flying. Neil Armstrong and his family lived about a mile or so from where I'm standing right now. 13 ABC's Lisa Guyton gives us a glimpse inside the home.
It may look like any other house in this Wapakoneta neighborhood, but this was the boyhood home of a reluctant American hero who helped write an important chapter in the history books.
You know, every time I talk about it, I kind of get goosebumps.
Karen Tullis has owned the former Armstrong family home for 30 years.
It's just a blessing to be able to have it.
Neil's bedroom is now Karen's office.
There is a lot of history in these walls.
And she loves sharing that history.
We've had visitors here from all over the world.
What Neil Armstrong did changed the course of the world. Memorabilia from Armstrong's incredible life once filled this home. In Karen's time here, she's discovered a few treasures that were left behind.
There have been a lot of different things as I've gone through the house, some things that I found that were the Armstrongs.
Neil Armstrong proved you can accomplish just about anything you set your mind to, including going all the way to the moon and back.
Before flying to the moon, Neil Armstrong was one of the best pilots in the U.S. Navy. His specialized skills likely saved his life later on.
If it wasn't for his quick thinking, an early mission may have taken a deadly turn.
2 items Neil Armstrong took with him in his personal preference kit onto the surface of the moon were a small piece of wood from the propeller and a piece of fabric from the Wright brothers' 1903 Kitty Hawk airplane.
Overnight, this group of 7 men became American astronaut heroes. The Mercury 7 were all veterans and expert pilots.
The goal of the Mercury program was to put an American in space. Ohio native John Glenn was one of the hand-picked candidates.
Ohioans can be proud of their role in getting astronauts to the moon.
John Glenn was chosen out of 110 candidates to be one of the first Americans in space. Immediately after the announcement, he and 6 others started rigorous training. 1 month after the Russian launch, Alan Shepard became the second man in space and the first American. And about a year later, John Glenn became the first American to orbit Earth. In 1965, JFK announced Project Gemini. It's seen as a bridge to the moon landing. Gemini had a few main goals. For one, crews of 2 were sent into space for weeks at a time in an attempt to prove humans could survive up there longer than a few hours. It also helped scientists learn how to rendezvous and dock in space. In one infamous incident, NASA's first docking attempt turned into a wild ride. Command pilot Neil Armstrong and pilot David Scott successfully docked, but then the spacecraft started to tumble. They spun so fast, their vision blurred. Luckily, Armstrong's quick thinking saved the mission. Though things didn't go quite as planned, it was still considered a success, and both men landed safely back on Earth. That infamous Gemini spacecraft is on display here at the Armstrong Air and Space Museum. A majority of the collection here focuses on Armstrong and the lunar landing, but you will find the museum is full of artifacts from all decades of space exploration.
The idea for this museum was born while Armstrong was still on the moon. It took several years to build, and the doors opened for the very first time July 20th, 1972. In the years since then, more than 2.5 million people have come through these doors.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
And with that, a man from small-town Ohio stepped onto the world stage.
Yes, indeed. They've got the flag up now, and you can see the stars and stripes on the lunar surface.
Neil Armstrong grew up in Wapakoneta. John Swez knew the Armstrong family from an early age.
He was quiet and reserved, which I've always thought was one of the reasons that NASA selected him to become the first man to walk on the moon.
John later became the executive director of the Armstrong Air and Space Museum in Wapakoneta.
He would stop in the museum from time to time just to say hello or to drop some type of artifact off or something.
The museum that bears the name of the first man on the moon is full of artifacts and pieces of history connected to the American space program.
The Armstrong Air and Space Museum celebrates not just the accomplishments of Neil Armstrong, but of Ohio astronauts and really the whole story of pushing the limits of exploring space and aviation. The road to space goes through Ohio.
It was a long road for Armstrong from Wapakoneta to the moon. He was a Navy fighter pilot and a test pilot before he became an astronaut.
He wanted to fly the most high-tech, the most, up-to-date craft that was out there, and flying a lunar module to the lunar surface was the ultimate.
When it comes to Armstrong and flight, a rare Skylancer that he flew as part of a NASA program greets visitors outside. And inside is the plane that started it all for Armstrong.
The Port Connecticut Airport's not here anymore, but it was a mile or so north of town. He'd come home from school, hop on his bike, pedal out, work on his piloting. Got his pilot license before he got his driver's license.
Armstrong's backup suit for the Apollo 11 mission is part of the museum collection. So is a suit Armstrong actually wore in space. And when it comes to a favorite artifact, well, that depends on who you ask. The Gemini 8 capsule that Armstrong flew in his first space mission tops a lot of lists. Another favorite, the moon rock.
When you look at that and I think that is from the moon, and you go out and look up the night sky and just imagine that, hey, some kid from Wapakoneta went up there, picked that up and brought it back. You know what I mean? It's just one of those, it's just an amazing concept.
Some of the early space technology is also on display.
If you look at the tips of the gloves, you see little lights there so that they could see in the dim levels of the spacecraft. Now, nowadays you have something like that, it's an LED. Those weren't LEDs, those were little, incandescent bulbs.
He started working with NASA in the 1960s and still works there today.
Some small thing might cause a malfunction.
Up next, hear from an Ohio scientist who helped develop the rocket technology to get Apollo 11 to the moon.
Physics and safety. Launching with the Earth's rotation gives spacecraft a boost into orbit, and the Atlantic Ocean eliminates civilian casualties in the event of failure.
With Gemini complete, NASA set its sights on a lunar landing. Project Apollo aimed to put the first people on the moon. When you think of Apollo missions, places like Houston and Cape Canaveral come to mind. But a large part of this story takes place 150 miles from here, in Cleveland. 13 ABC's Dan Smith takes us to the NASA Glenn Research Center.
The center's story begins nearly 3 decades before that one small step.
NASA Glenn was established in 1941 as part of NASA's predecessor agency, and our primary goal at the time was to improve the state of aircraft engines.
When NASA was established in the late 1950s, it was then a natural leap for the center from the sky's the limit to a loftier goal. As for the renaming of Lewis Labs after a certain Ohio native,
So John Glenn never worked here. However, when he was a Mercury astronaut, he and all 7 of the Mercury astronauts came here to train.
the center also provided Neil Armstrong with his first job after graduating from Purdue in 1955.
He really wanted to be a test pilot. And if you wanted to be a test pilot, the NACA is where you went.
A new position opened in California for Neil 5 months later, but not before getting some flight hours in at Lewis, his logbook still intact. Fast forward to the Apollo program, named and overseen by the center's director at the time, Dr. Abe Silverstein. During his tenure came the center's greatest contribution to the moon landing, liquid hydrogen as rocket fuel.
Building a faster airplane.
Dr. Louis Pavanelli has worked here since 1960 and was part of an 18-person team looking at rocket instability using that new fuel.
It had the potential to destroy the engine completely through an explosion.
Dr. Wernher von Braun, the so-called father of modern rocketry, refused to use liquid hydrogen at first.
He was Mr. Big. I mean, Washington was listening to him, not to NASA.
It was Dr. Silverstein who eventually sold von Braun on the benefits of the new fuel. By 1968, Dr. Pavanelli's team had perfected the design, and it's no coincidence the first successful lunar landing wasn't long after.
It was, like almost unbelievable.
Many of us don't know if or when we're about to make history, but the Lewis Labs team was fully aware the country's reputation was at stake should they not take chances and make mistakes on the ground instead of 270,000 miles away.
It doesn't happen in a vacuum. Everything is built on what you've done before, and history is just simply lessons learned.
Despite the excitement surrounding the Apollo missions, things got off to a tragic start. 3 astronauts were killed during a pre-test flight for Apollo 1 when a fire broke out in the command module.
The loss was a sharp reminder of the dangers that lie ahead. But on July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 launched from Cape Canaveral with Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Edwin Buzz Aldrin on board.
2, 1, 0,
And just like that, the men set out to explore a new frontier. 3 days into the mission, the entire country held its breath.
Apollo 11, this is Houston. All your systems are looking good. Going around the corner. We'll see you on the other side. Over.
Roger. Everything looks okay up here. And we've had loss of signal as Apollo 11 goes behind the moon.
The crew made it into lunar orbit. Now it was time to descend. As Neil and Buzz climbed into the module, Michael Collins stayed behind. The landing wasn't easy. Neil Armstrong piloted some of it manually and had to change course at the last second to avoid a crater. But finally, touchdown.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
With the world watching, Neil Armstrong was the first to set foot on the moon.
That's one small step for man. One giant leap for mankind.
Buzz Aldrin followed soon after. The pair spent about 21 and a half hours on the moon's surface collecting data and taking in the scenery.
Magnificent sight out here.
Magnificent desolation.
It's one of those moments in life that you remember.
And we were near Westgate at the time. So I said, well, let's go into Sears. The whole staff was watching TV. I don't think anybody was working there that day.
I was sitting with my father. He was born in 1886, and he lived to see man landing on the moon. He thought that was really marvelous.
They would take long shots of the people watching the screen in the control room, but we could also see the pictures, and they would get up close to the screens that they were watching, and we could see it that way. That's the way we saw it.
And I remember seeing that boot. The camera was on the moon lander, and you saw that heavy boot come out, and I just had a feeling, I don't know, uneasy. Well, what's going to happen when he lands on the moon?
To explore the world that God made and learn all we could about it, and it was wonderful.
I went outside afterwards, and I don't remember what time of the day it was, but we sort of looked at the moon and to see, like, maybe you could see something,
The moon landing was not only history in the making, it was a television event 650 million people around the world watched as Neil Armstrong took one small step. Broadcaster Gordon Ward saw it unfold from inside a newsroom in Toledo.
Dead silence in the newsroom, cheering when Neil Armstrong finally put that first foot down. Everybody cheered.
Gordon Ward, like so many Americans, vividly remembers those breathtaking moments when Neil Armstrong took his small step onto the surface of the moon. In fact, much of Northwest Ohio was glued to the set, but not everyone was watching for the same reason.
Culture was different then. There were not as many women working, and they loved to watch soap operas. So our switchboard lit up with people screaming, "This is all not real. This is all being staged by somebody. Give us back the soap operas."
Gordon says the news stations in Toledo extensively covered the run-up to the moon landing. And although he never got the chance to meet Armstrong, Gordon says he felt that small-town Ohio connection from what seemed so impossibly far away.
Driving home that night, I would look up at the moon as I drove along and know that there were 2 astronauts sleeping up there.
After the successful return of Apollo 11, 5 more Apollo missions were carried out, and 10 more Americans set foot on the moon.
NASA set a precedent for early space exploration. Today, hundreds of Americans have toured outer space. In fact, 2 are hovering above Earth right now. When we come back, hear real astronaut stories of their time in orbit.
After returning from space, Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins had to fill out a U.S. Customs form in Honolulu, Hawaii. On the form, their departure was listed as moon, and their cargo was listed as moon rock and moon dust samples.
Today, Americans are continuing to push the limits of space exploration. They're doing important research that will send us back to the moon and farther into space.
Seeing Earth from space is a rare treat. Only about 570 people have ever soaked in the view while floating weightlessly.
You do truly have the God's eye view of the planet from that perspective.
Jenna Cavandi, a 3-time shuttle astronaut, directs NASA's Glenn Research Center in Cleveland. Logging 33 days, orbiting the Earth 535 times, Cavandi knows a thing or two about life in space.
I would sleep on the ceiling just because you could. You know, where else can you say you slept on the ceiling?
She delighted in microgravity, working upside down, and the sensation of superpowers.
Things don't weigh anything, so you can take something pretty massive and move it slowly, but, you know, by yourself, because you couldn't lift 300 or 400 pounds on the surface of the planet, but you can in space. So it's just a really interesting perspective of feeling free.
Cavandi played a critical role in making spacewalks possible. On her last mission, she helped construct the International Space Station, where spacewalks are now regularly documented for all to watch with bated breath.
And so we flew up the airlock, and the airlock is the part of the vehicle that allows us to do spacewalks. So you can go in that, suck out all the air, go to vacuum, let people go out and do spacewalks, come back in, repressurize it, and then come back in and do their regular work.
Cavandi and fellow veterans of outer space ventures, like astronaut Gregory Johnson, say a return to the moon will play an important role in putting people on the red planet.
Certainly going to the moon is something we would like to do, but then we want to stay and establish a base. And once we establish a base, it may be where we go off and go back to Mars and go to explore Mars.
NASA has named the lunar return program Artemis, Apollo's twin sister and Greek goddess of the moon, all but guaranteeing a woman will be sent to the moon for the first time.
Right now, the next generation is looking towards the sky, but instead of landing on the moon, they're dreaming of making it to Mars.
One local school is working on making that dream a reality. A peek inside that state-of-the-art facility as we continue our journey of one small step.
When a broken switch threatened to keep the lunar lander from leaving the moon, Buzz Aldrin pushed a felt-tipped pin into the hole to complete the circuit, allowing Armstrong and Aldrin to meet up with Collins.
Some of the Apollo astronauts were also pilots in the U.S. Air Force. Because of that, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in nearby Dayton has the privilege of displaying spacecraft that actually made it to the moon. 13 ABC's Michael Bratton takes us there.
From massive rockets to test planes, the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force's Space Gallery is an impressive sight. But among all the astonishing displays sit some unassuming vessels that helped set the tone. The Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo spacecraft all played vital roles in getting U.S. astronauts to the moon nearly 50 years ago.
When you look at those three spacecraft, you can see the progression of human spaceflight, at least American human spaceflight.
Museum historian Dr. Doug Lantry has dedicated his life to studying each one.
If you look at all of these missions through Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, one set of objectives built upon the other, until you get to actually landing on the moon.
While each mission played its part, the museum is particularly proud of the Apollo 15 command module, the fourth to land on the moon. A three-man all-Air Force crew traveled there and back in this gumdrop-shaped vessel that's about the size of a minivan.
It was a cramped space, but then again, these were extraordinary people, extraordinarily well-trained, mission-focused, disciplined.
In addition to the spacecraft, the museum also displays various NASA artifacts and astronaut equipment, including spacesuits. Along with celebrating accomplishments on the moon, the museum also highlights our next advancements in space exploration with displays like this space shuttle exhibit.
It just adds that extra level that makes it extra special and more inspiring to them.
While there's plenty to see and do, Henry says the shuttle exhibit is always a favorite, as it includes a real NASA crew compartment trainer.
You can get up in there and go and look into the middeck and see what the living quarters were like and the working quarters. You can go up some stairs and look into the flight deck and to see where the astronauts actually piloted the shuttle.
By showing and teaching America's success in space, the museum's hope is to inspire future generations to continue to reach for the heavens.
Decades after the historic landing, there is an urgency to make another giant leap for mankind. That's where the Challenger Learning Center of Lake Erie West comes in. Since 2003, the center has been a leader in STEM education. Here's 13 ABC's Christian Brown.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
In 1986, the Challenger exploded during the launch. 4 astronauts, 1 payload specialist, and a civilian school teacher were killed. To honor the legacy of the Challenger crew, their families created an international network of more than 40 Challenger Learning Centers. One is in Oregon.
Crew may now board and take their seats.
The goal was to spark the minds of the next generation of space explorers.
You hook these two together and you're strapped in.
At this center in Oregon, young students can learn about science, technology, engineering, and math through space simulators like this one. Today's mission?
3, 2, 1. Main engine cut off. We have arrived in space.
We're traveling to Mars, and we're going to send out a satellite and give them supplies to the people on Mars.
The Challenger Learning Center is committed to ensuring the longevity of space exploration. Students enjoy the simulated missions, knowing the next leap will be made by their generation.
We have to keep going, we have to keep exploring, we have to keep expanding, otherwise we're not going to be able to have the resources or anything to survive.
Once off the spacecraft, each student is given a job within mission control.
I'm the communications officer and the data officer.
So will humankind make a leap on Mars?
Probably not in our generations, but our children will definitely be on Mars.
Kyle Spots is an interactive science specialist at the Challenger Center.
We have that key role to actually push them into a future of success in that program.
Our craft as it enters Martian orbit today.
Tyler O'Brien is the lead interactive science specialist here.
When students come through here, we hope that one, they have a new appreciation for space science, for the history that's already been built upon, for where we're at now, and then this planetary stepping stones for the moon, and then going on to Mars and even further planets.
Located directly behind the MMD.
There's hands-on learning for kids of all ages here, from toddlers to high school students.
Spacecraft, this is Mars Patrol. We read you. Over.
When it comes to space exploration, the Hubble telescope is one of the world's most important tools, but the design had a flaw.
And then we did surgical repairs on 2 of the other instruments. These were circuit card repairs never done in space before.
Still to come, hear from an astronaut who made the journey into space to make the repairs.
Buzz Aldrin's mother's maiden name was Moon.
Some of the best space photos in the world are captured by the Hubble telescope, but getting to use the telescope is another big challenge. In fact, you have better odds of getting into Harvard or Yale. But one astronomer at the University of Toledo is beating the odds time and time again.
Here, men from the planet Earth, first set foot upon the moon, July 1969.
Well, I grew up with that knowledge, right? Knowing that humanity had just achieved something never done before, right around the time I was born.
Rupali Chandar was born just a couple months after the historic Apollo 11 moon landing, and she's been looking to the sky ever since.
I have always loved astronomy.
And liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery with the Hubble Space Telescope, our window on the universe.
Chandar was studying to be an astronomer when the promising Hubble Space Telescope was launched in 1990. But after $1.5 billion and 2 decades of planning, the universe essentially gained a 12-ton piece of space junk.
There was a problem with it.
And it took an out-of-this-world mission to clear up the view.
You couldn't bring it back, so we had to send people out to fix Hubble, and it worked.
One image at a time, the Hubble Space Telescope changed our view of space and advanced our knowledge of the universe to hundreds of millions of light years beyond our galaxy.
Hubble gives us this amazing ability to look at nearby galaxies like our own Milky Way, but to see them in their entirety.
Chandar has done just that. She is one of the world's leading Hubble researchers with more than 20 projects involving the Space Telescope. As it zips around the Earth at 17,000 miles per hour, Chandar can look into the window of outer space right from her office on the University of Toledo campus and make cutting-edge discoveries in the process.
I don't think it can be put into words. When you see something in the data, when you take that data and you analyze it and you make a figure that's telling you something that no one has really realized before, it's a feeling that's not really describable.
But even if you aren't taking snapshots on the world's deep space camera, you can feel the impact of astronomy's achievements.
There are advances in medicine and in cancer detection that have come through algorithms that computer scientists wrote that we tested in astronomy.
The discoveries are not slowing down.
It is like the golden era of astronomy. I think we've been in it for the last decade. It will continue.
It could probably go down in history as the ultimate repair job.
In order to fix Hubble, astronauts had to blast off more than 300 miles above the Earth's surface. So what could go wrong? 13 ABC's Sasha Bray gives us a first-hand account of the journey. And we are pleased to have the opportunity to talk with Gregory Johnson, the pilot of STS-125, which conducted that mission. Mr. Johnson, thank you so much for talking with us. I would imagine that is something you still remember quite vividly. What was that experience like?
The experience was unbelievable, frankly, and it was, we trained for over almost just short of 3 years, so, and we had 5 back-to-back spacewalks, so it was an incredible experience to be into space and float, and then incredible that we actually fixed the Hubble Space Telescope. We didn't harm it, and it is at the apex of its ability to view the universe.
How do you think that that has impacted what we know about space, the universe?
Well, Hubble has had huge discoveries over the years. One of them, maybe the most significant discovery, is that the universe is not only expanding but accelerating out. It's also been used to find exoplanets, which are planets around stars, possible planets where we would find human life. So it's unbelievable.
When we talk about those repair missions that everyone made, including you, we think about the video that we see now of surgical precision doctors when they're doing very delicate work, and we imagine it has to be the same sort of thing for you. I mean, every moment counts out there, every little action counts. I mean, that's a lot of pressure, isn't it?
It was a little daunting, I'm going to tell you that. It was pressure. They typically on a spacewalk, they will timeline you to every 15 minutes. You've got to get something done. There's a picture of Mike Good congratulating everybody on a successful repair. So it is a little daunting. You kind of know that you're working as the last crew to fix the Hubble Space Telescope. So luckily we did a great job, and here's a picture of it being released to unlock the secrets of the universe.
And to you personally, I have to ask, what does it mean to you to have been a part of that?
You know, as an 18-year-old, I wrote down three of my goals in life. One of them was to give back to humanity. And I kind of feel like I got that accomplished with Hubble. We have provided images, we provided understanding of the universe, and I think that's been extremely rewarding.
Amazing. To date, Hubble has taken more than 1.4 million observations and counting. Our thanks to NASA astronaut Gregory Johnson. So great to talk with you.
Oh, great. Thank you very much.
Right now, scientists are preparing for a very important launch, and a University of Toledo graduate is leading the effort.
Space is becoming more affordable.
How it could change the future of space travel, next.
Astronaut John Young flew on 2 Gemini missions, 2 Apollo missions, 2 shuttle missions, and was the 9th person to walk on the moon.
It's been more than 40 years since the last mission to the moon, but right now scientists in Ohio are pioneering technology for the next lunar landing and beyond.
Half a century has passed since what has been considered one of man's greatest achievements, though it's not in NASA's nature to dwell on the past. Instead, the agency's learning from it to build on future missions, namely our return to the moon, in which Ohio's once again taking the reins.
We're playing a large role in the next visit to the moon in a couple of ways.
Dr. Janet Kavandi, a 3-time shuttle mission specialist, is overseeing a variety of projects at Cleveland's Glenn Research Center. One of them, the method of descent and ascent using an orbiting platform dubbed Gateway.
What we did in the Apollo program was we flew directly from the surface of the Earth to the surface of the moon. So now what we're going to do is have essentially a platform that will be in lunar orbit, where we can send lunar landers to the surface and back and bring people to the surface and back.
Another program involves switching out liquid hydrogen fuel for a much lighter ion propulsion system.
What this does is, since it's so much more efficient in the use of that fuel, instead of taking the fuel, you can take things like oxygen for the astronauts, or you can take payloads like landers.
And liftoff at dawn, the dawn of Orion.
The Orion crew module itself will be put through its paces, an ongoing mission at Glenn's satellite campus, Plum Brook Station in Sandusky.
Save money, test first. We want to test things because space launches are very expensive.
Among the facilities on site, the world's largest vacuum chamber, standing 12 stories tall. Inside, Orion will be placed inside this cryo shroud, affectionately dubbed the Big Burrito, to simulate the cold environment of space.
We can get that down to about minus 250 degrees Fahrenheit, although for the Orion test we'll only go down to about minus 100.
Plum Brook Station also has this reverberant acoustic test facility, the most powerful for its size in the world. Here, the capsule is subjected to sound on all fronts, mimicking the dynamic environment experienced during liftoff.
And this allows us to check to see if the mechanical structure can handle those stresses of going supersonic.
Dr. Cavandi says returning to the moon is worth the time and effort, hoping to extend humanity's reach to other planets.
Part of moving away from the Earth is to help ensure the survival of the species, and if we are able to try out processes on the moon for generating oxygen, for growing food, for generating, living habitats that protect us from radiation, then we can actually make that a possibility on Mars.
With a looming 2024 deadline for the next lunar mission, researchers say they're up to the task.
I really like the fact that we're trying to do this in a shorter time frame. It does have challenges, right? But some of the benefits of the challenges are it's going to make us focus and prioritize.
Let's use the tools that are available and use them in new ways that we can discover to make our lives better.
Just last month, Plumbrook Station was given $20 million to redevelop the hypersonic tunnel facility. The investment will boost new developments as the Department of Defense explores hypersonic weapons.
A trip to the moon always seemed to be out of this world, but now, for the first time ever, it could be the wave of the future.
5. All 3 engines up and burning. 2, 1, 0, and liftoff. The final.
Imagine blasting off to space. It's something the average person can only dream of doing. But what if it's possible? University of Michigan and University of Toledo graduate Robert Dempsey is the man behind the mission.
Literally, one of my earliest memories was doing a spacewalk. And by that, what I mean is I was wearing my bathrobe, and I'd stuffed it with all kinds of towels so that it was bulky and hard to maneuver. And I'd taken some rope and tied myself to the bed, and that was my tether. And I was floating around the spacecraft, which was also my bed. I never waned in that passion, and I've been doing astronomy or space exploration ever since.
Dr. Bob works for Boeing and NASA. He is the flight director for a new project aimed at docking a commercial spacecraft with the International Space Station, an orbiting laboratory.
I have been involved from the beginning, where we literally were designing the spacecraft.
From the build to training and simulations, the crew is ready for launch. The Boeing CST-100 Starliner will travel unmanned for the maiden voyage, with the goal of serving as a way to get astronauts from the U.S. to the International Space Station. Right now, NASA relies on Russia for transport, but the rides come with a hefty price tag, topping $70 million per person. If this is successful, it could open up a new world of travel.
Space is becoming more affordable, and I think there'll be a lot of regular citizens taking that trip.
The debut of the Boeing Starliner is the first step in a not so far-fetched idea of someday flying people to space hotels. And for Dr. Bob, a lifetime of preparation is just a few weeks away.
It's literally a dream fulfilled. Being a flight director has achieved everything that I ever wanted to do and more. I've had awesome opportunities, many of them historic.
Dr. Bob says the launch of the Starliner is set for August 17th. We will let you know when that happens.
It takes a team of 30 technicians and drivers to operate the $14 million, 6 million pound crawler transporter. NASA has 2, and over their lifetimes, they have traveled over 3,400 miles. Their nicknames are Hans and Franz.
The next time you look up at the night sky, see more than the moon and the stars.
Instead, maybe you'll think of a small-town Ohioan or the life's work of a Cleveland scientist.
We hope our program gave you some insight into the manpower behind the moon mission and the work being done in our community to take us farther into space.
Thanks so much for joining us for One Small Step, and a special thank you to the Armstrong Air and Space Museum here in Wapakoneta.
Good night and Godspeed.